Hi, everybody. Today is Saturday, June 28th, 2025, and our friend Professor Ted Postol is back with us. Welcome back, Ted.
Nice to be back. I've been up late last night and early this morning trying to put together some slides that we'll have to jump around them, but and you will have to keep me on track with questions and stop me if I go off the edge.
Ted, I want to start. We talk about the capabilities of the American or Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. You mentioned you talked about it before. What we've learned since that attack, those attacks happened in Iran, and what can we learn? How successful these attacks were in terms of the way that Donald Trump is talking about it. And there were many people who believe that mm, the attacks were not the way that Donald Trump is trying to picture in them. Your take on what has happened, and from what we know that we're sure of information coming out of Iran, and even I believe White House doesn't know that much about. But from what we've learned so far, what's your evaluation? What's your assessment?
Well, let me start out immediately so your audience fully understands this, and I'll reemphasize this. We just don't know a lot of detail. We can infer things, and we can take educated guesses. Guess is the operative word here. And we can also identify information that should be available, that is not available, that would tell us what we need to know. And in particular, I am in the process over this weekend of drafting a little note to members of Congress where I'm suggesting to them specific information, which I'll share with your audience here, that they should request. And in particular, I'm emphasizing that that information is not classified or not appropriately classified, but they probably will face that claim. And I've provided them with some information that will help, and I can share that with the audience here. So uh, let me start out by addressing a particular issue that there does seem to be considerable confusion about. I don't claim that I'm fully up to speed on this myself, but the whether or not the Iranians actually were able to save the 60% enriched uranium that they had. They have about we know they have about 400 kilograms of this. Now the reason we know is we have the Iranians have been largely following the mandates of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and which require them to provide detailed information about their program. So it's important for people to recognize that this program, while not being totally open in terms of the information, we don't know if there were things done by the Iranians that we don't know about, of course. And quite honestly, if I put myself in the mindset of Iranian leadership, I would have to say that this is not an accusation so much as an observation. I suspect that there's material out there we don't know about, in particular centrifuges. Um, but uh, you know, given the strategy of the Iranians, let me describe their strategy as I understand it. Their strategy has been to not build a nuclear weapon. So we are pushing them as hard as we can to go ahead and make a decision to build a nuclear weapon. This is the dumbest policy you could imagine. Their strategy is quite obviously one where they want to be a be a threat that they could proceed to build a nuclear weapon, be a credible threat, without taking that final step. And the reason they don't want to take, there are many reasons why they won't want to take this final step, but one of them, or three of them, are Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. Uh, None of these countries are likely to tolerate an Iran with a nuclear weapon when they don't have one themselves. And all of them are capable of obtaining nuclear weapons by various means. And and Iran correctly judges. I think there's wisdom there. The leadership of Iran correctly judges that Iran's security situation is better without having these other states, nuclear weapon states, even though their relationships at the moment, their political relations are reasonably stabilized at the moment. But these things are, anybody who is politically astute knows that it can change quickly. And you just don't want to be eyeball to eyeball with a state that's nearby and also a nuclear weapon state. It's just not good for the security of your country. Of course, there's of course the Israeli card, which the Israelis have a significant number of nuclear weapons. Unlike Iran, the Israelis are not a party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran releases enormous amounts of information through allowing inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency because Iran is a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, Iran hasn't complied with every detail, but still, we know a tremendous amount about Iran's nuclear program. We know nothing about the Israeli nuclear program. People speculate there's anywhere from 80 or 90 to even a couple of hundred nuclear warheads in Israel. And it's quite an asymmetric situation. And many of your viewers, including me, uh, are probably somewhat concerned that the Western countries are yelling about Iran when they're not yelling about Israel, because Israel is a proliferator and a big time proliferator. There's an asymmetry in terms of security that I think is worth keeping in mind. If Iran has just a few nuclear weapons, let's say three or four or five, they could do mortal damage to Israel. I mean, if they hit Tel Aviv, Haifa, Beersheba, a few other big cities, uh, that sort of does so much damage to Israel as a country. It's hard to know whether or not they could recover. In reply, the Israelis, if they wanted to do a similar level of damage to Iran, they would have to use a very large number of nuclear weapons, which they do have. So it may be that we're looking down the barrel of a potential nuclear war uh, that would be very large in scale uh, and um, and devastating, really, in terms of global environmental consequences between Iran and Israel if this thing is allowed to go on out of control. And right now, I would say it's not being dealt with very well by the Western powers, in particular the leadership of the United States. This attack, I can just I can imagine being a fly on the wall, listening to the arguments in front of the Ayatollah Khamenei, from his various advisors, with some of them saying, if we didn't have if we had a nuclear weapon, the Israelis would have not attacked us this way. So he's under a lot of pressure to proceed and give the go ahead to build a nuclear weapon. The dirty little truth of the whole non-proliferation regime is that enriching from a low percentage of uranium, in the case of most countries, it would be 3 or 4% uh, to 90%, which is what you need for an atomic bomb, is a small task relative to being able to enrich uranium for power reactors. And this is let me get to this point right away because I think this is something that I think the audience really needs to understand in general, uh, be, simply because of um, the the fact of the facts of how enrichment is done, or the practice of enrichment. People are always throwing around numbers, but the numbers really hide uh, hide a clarity that you could easily obtain uh, with with some simple conceptual diagrams I'll show you next, and and then some arithmetic I'll show you. The arithmetic is really quite simple, as I'll show you. Could we go to slide 85? Just jump all the way in. Okay, this diagram is a conceptual diagram. So what I'm trying to show here is how the enrichment process conceptually occurs. So you see these little grids of boxes. Let's look at it the leftmost grid of boxes. With underneath it says 10% enriched. So in this conceptual diagram, let's think of this as um, a pan I have on the stove, frying pan, and in the frying pan I have a liquid which has sugar in it, and it's 10% enriched with sugar. So I start boiling the pan, and what the pan does is in the next step, each unit of time, I boil off a fixed unit of water. If I go twice as long, as twice as many fixed units. If I go three times as long, as three times as many fixed units. And as we proceed to the right, let's focus on the 50% enriched. This is the next to the leftmost um, group of boxes. When I get to 50%, I only need one more unit of boiling to get to 100%. So if you look at the curves below, the graph below, it shows you if you look at the rightmost part of the graph between 9 and 10. So between steps 9 and 10, I go from 50% to 100% rapidly. So the point that I'm making here is that I get to higher and higher enrichments, then it becomes my ability to accelerate my process of enriching is greater. All right, so this is a conceptual picture. Let's go to the next slide. All right, this is the cat's meow. This is the arithmetic. On the rightmost section, you see a red square that symbolizes 25 kilograms of 90% enriched uranium. On the leftmost side, where you see all these boxes, um, the 25 kilograms of uranium are put in a box for conceptual purposes, but they would in reality be distributed in the natural uranium that this is supposed to symbolize. So this symbolizes about 3,200 kilograms of natural uranium, which I'm going to boil down through enrichment to 25 kilograms of 90% enriched uranium. So there's a unit of um, uh, of concentration capability called the separative work unit. We need not worry. We can think of it for the moment as the time I'm boiling the pan. So if I need 5,500 separative work units, um, you see at the top, you see there's an arrow that shows the total amount of separative work I need is 5,500 SWUs, separative work units, of energy of work to obtain the 90% enriched uranium from the 3,000 kilograms of natural uranium. So first, let's look at the first step. I need 3,500 SWUs to just get to about a 3.5% enriched uranium for my nuclear reactor. I need a lot of. If I want to get to 20% enrichment, as we see in the next step, I only need 1,500 separative work units to boil that down to. Then, if I'm at 20%, I only need 380 separative work units to get to 60% enriched, and we're talking about 60% enriched uranium that the Iranians have. So, so all they need to do with that 60% enriched uranium is all they need is 120 separative work units uh, to uh, to uh, be able to get the 90% enriched uranium. So if they have the capacity, let's say they have 5,500 separative work units of capacity um, in in their centrifuge system. They have a lot more than that, but let's just say this. Um, then what this arithmetic means, it would take 1 year with this. They'd have to invest their 5,500 separative work units over 1 year to obtain 90% enriched uranium, starting with 3,200 kilograms of natural uranium. But if they have 60%, they only need 120 over 5,000 separative work units of time. So basically about 1/60th to 1/50th. So 1 week, 52 weeks in a year. So if they have, 40 kilograms or so of enriched uranium, then that 40 kilograms translates to 25 kilograms of atomic bomb. So that's where they are now. So that's so if they have the separator, and they do have, there are questions now about how much is left because a lot of damage has been done to the centrifuges that have been working. We don't know how much damage, and I'll discuss that later. But it's very clear if you were sitting in let's imagine we're sitting in Washington, where I think the average IQ's got to be in the two-digit category, um, and we were thinking about making an attack of this kind to stop the nuclear program. We would sit there and say, these guys have so much separative work. We would have to destroy 99% of their, or 95% of all their centrifuges, many of which are underground and protected, many of which may not be known to us. If you're building thousands and thousands of centrifuges, stashing away a few hundred of them without us knowing about it is not a big deal. So, and we know from the International Atomic Energy Agency that they have stated that they're not sure they understand where every centrifuge, they're not sure they have a record of every centrifuge being produced. So we don't, the monitoring agency itself admits that they don't know how many centrifuges might be stowed away. Now, if you put yourself in the mindset of the political leadership of Iran, uh, as I will now do for myself, I have this game I'm playing. I'm not a monster. I'm not, a vicious animal, but I'm worried about a world that is very uncertain. I have the Israelis who attack me at will, whether or not I do anything. I have the Americans who are going to side with the Israelis no matter what. I have the Western countries who are turning a blind eye to everything. I think I'll stash away a few of these things in a deep cave somewhere. It's not that I'm a fundamentally dishonest person, but I'm worried about my own security. So I can't say this for sure, but I think it's a very good first guess that uh, even if we had destroyed everything, and I think there's very weak evidence that we did, um, we we do not we have not stopped the ability of the Iranians to build a small number of atomic bombs, which would be enough to end Israel's future existence. So, so if we were thinking about doing such an attack, if I were sitting in the Pentagon, as I did at one time in my life, when the war crimes trials begin, I'll have to stand up. And I was working with military officers, and I worked with very good military officers. They're smart. They understood things. They were very. I was respectful of them. They were respectful of me. They had skills I didn't have. They had knowledge, but I played a role as I was playing a role as a technical advisor. I would have said, Chief of Naval Operations, we have a very small chance of succeeding in destroying these the requisite number of centrifuges to really stop the Iranian program, and it may not be a very good gamble to go ahead with an attack. And I know that the chief would have understood me because I dealt with him, and whether he would said we got to go ahead anyway. That's another. That's his. He's the leader, not me. But one wonders, was anybody in the American administration asking this question? My guess is Tulsi Gabbard was asking this question, and my guess is she tried like hell to, to get these people to listen, and they weren't listening. So this attack was executed without any thought to the likelihood that it would fail with almost 100% probability, because the enrichment needed to be able to uh, to to obtain a nuclear weapon by for Iran to obtain is small, and they already have the 60% enriched uranium. Now, let me. Uh, Secretary of Defense Hegseth made many comments that were misleading, and I think the Pentagon briefing was misleading. It had to be intentional. You can't be that incomprehensibly, leaving things out that are critical for the. When I was an advisor in the Pentagon, I always asked myself, what does the decision maker need to know for them to make a balanced assessment of for their decision. Now that meant now I was always very careful. My preference was not what I did not I I was I was in an advisory role, not a decision making role. So my job was to provide the decision maker with all the information that's relevant to them making a balanced judgment. So when there was information that uh, you know, I could have omitted to skewer their judgment, I was extra careful to make sure I put it in there. Because that's your job as an advisor, not the decision maker. Otherwise, what do you need a decision maker for? You're usurping their role, and you're also undermining their ability to responsibly make decisions. Uh, if they meet their fiduciary responsibilities to understand what they're doing when they make a decision, to understand the costs and benefits. If they don't do that, then it's on them. But if you don't give them the adequate information, it's on you. And I never wanted it to be on me. I mean, it was not my role. So, so let's look at this business of the 60% enriched uranium. Hegseth stated things in an ambiguous way, trying to suggest that um, it was very unlikely that the Iranians were able to get this stored 60% uh, uranium hexafluoride out with us without us knowing about it. I think it was pretty clear on that, or pretty clear in his obfuscation of that. So why don't we go to slide 83? All right. I drive a Prius, so I told the Prius, very compact car. This is a diagram of a Prius, and next to the diagram is a standard uranium hexafluoride container. Uranium hexafluoride is is a solid, close to a solid. It is a solid at room temperature, but enough uranium hexafluoride typically evaporates or what sublimes from the solid. It's like goes from a solid material to a vapor directly. So you want to put it in a container, and there are standard containers that are used. And I'm just depicting here a standard container by its size. Now, of course, it would be tricky to maneuver this standard container into the back of the hatchback. You'd certainly have to keep the hatchback door open. But what this illustrates, imagine this wasn't the hatchback; it was just a station wagon, or just a truck with a tarp on it. Uh, moving now, this container contains one third. If it has all the 60% enriched uranium hexafluoride that the Iranians have in the one container, it contains one third of what it can potentially hold. So if we go to slide 81, there's one of these containers. It's on a truck bed. You get a sense of its size, about 2.5 feet in diameter. And if we look at the next slide, 82, you can see that it can hold about 15 when it's full. It can hold about uh, uh, 15,000 kilograms of uranium hexafluoride. Well, if you only have 400 kilograms of uranium hexafluoride, you probably have it in a container that's considerably smaller than this container. The container has to be sealed because you don't want the stuff evaporating, the uranium hexafluoride evaporating out of it. But it's a drum. It's a drum. It's designed so it's sealed, and you can easily put that in the back of the Prius, no problem at all. So um, when Hegseth suggests that we know that the Iranians were unable to move this stuff without us knowing about it, what is he talking about? We would have known. We probably would have certainly known that they were moving it because we knew the location through the International Atomic Energy. But they put it on a truck, drive it out into a garage, transfer it to another. It's not a hard thing to move something that small and that light around in a way that even the best technical intelligence wouldn't be able to track. And so that's one of the many misleading claims that were made by Hegseth in this briefing, along with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who, in the last job description I saw for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, lying to the American public was not one of the duties. It seemed to me. Keeping secrets, as you need militarily, of course, uh, that's a different story. And all right, so the main point I hope the audience understands is that the amount of the volume and weight of the enriched uranium hexafluoride gas that could be made into maybe roughly 10 atomic bombs is relatively small and could be moved around in a Prius-like vehicle with the right container, and any other vehicle for that matter. You could put it on a cart and pull it with a motorcycle. Wouldn't be. So uh, it seems a little bit optimistic to assume or to claim that we know where they moved this and it was too difficult for them to move it without us knowing about it. And they knew they were going to be, or they believed they were going to be attacked for many days. They were making uh, preparations. And this is, I, I'll be direct. I see this as a kind of polite way to say it is Americans are an ethnocentric culture. You know, we have vicious, dangerous enemies to our south and north, like Mexico and Canada, oceans between us and everyone else. We don't have a, you know, we. It's sort of our geographic situation has to influence the culture, even. But there's kind of I think of it as kind of a racism that you see, which is really stupid because all you have to do is look with your eyes and see what other people do everywhere else. And you realize that, people are either dumb or very clever in all groups. And the very clever people, if they're in a society that makes it possible for them to make a contribution, can do a lot. And I, over many years, I've known many Iranians because it's been subjected to such an awful uh, political and social history that a lot of Iranians are in the United States now. Many of them are even second generation. I know these people because a bunch of them are very accomplished scientists and engineers. And when you look at what the Iranians are doing in their own country, they're damn smart. They use their technical people effectively. So there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't have that this stuff isn't squirreled away somewhere that we could never reach because you could put it under 3,000 feet of mountain in a small cavity. You don't need a big um, cascade room of the kind that you're going to use centrifuges in. So so basically, the dirty little secret is a very small amount of additional enrichment gives you a nuclear weapon. Even actually, if you're in a, even if you are, even if you have a nuclear energy program, which is one of the reasons why International Atomic Energy Agency oversight is so important. And uh, it's it's really important to understand that this arithmetic associated with enrichment is a profound and fundamental problem that can only be solved with political agreements and oversight. The technology to enrich further, if you can enrich 3.5% uranium for your nuclear energy program, you can make nuclear weapons because the additional work is well within your capability if you can do the one. The other is falling off a log. So that's a little bit of unpleasant truth that the audience should understand that is not really well well in, that people are not well informed about, and I think probably for reasons that I regard as somewhat nefarious. You don't want people to know that this is a problem because if you want to advocate nuclear power, which which you may believe is fine, and I'm not saying one way or the other, but if you want to talk about the risks and benefits, you have to point out, you have to be upfront and acknowledge that if you have the ability to enrich for a nuclear power program, you have the ability to build nuclear weapons. This is one of the reasons why enrichment is so tightly held. The countries that have this technology do not share it with the countries that use the technology. You want to have a reactor in your country and you're not a great power, I'll give you the uranium so you can fuel your reactor. And when the uranium is no longer usable in the reactor. We're going to take it out. We're going to let it cool because it's extremely radioactive, and we're going to take it back and we're going to reprocess it or whatever we do with it or bury it or. But you can't keep it because, and that's why the system is set up the way it is. All right, so let's talk about the issue of destroying the centrifuges in the Fordow uh, facility. Now, if we look at the uh, let's go to slide 11. If we look at the Fordow facility, uh, what I've shown are two vents, two vent structures that were in the structure itself, identifiable from satellite photos. And if you want to see, I'm sorry to jump around. It's your fault. Maybe, if you want to see what these vents look like, come on. Let's jump to slide 59. This is the diagram from the briefing that was presented by the Pentagon on the, I guess it's the 25th of June. If you look at the leftmost figures, the of what's called the first ventilation shaft, um, that uh, and then and then you go two slides further. I've blown them up as best I can. One, that's at 61. You can see the satellite photos, and this is an interesting instruction for your audience too. If you want to know how you built this thing, or how it was built, we watch. We have satellites. We watch this every time we get a chance to take a photograph. So the top of the three photographs shows you the ventilation shaft while it was under construction. So if you want to get a guesstimate of the size and volume of the shaft, you watch this thing being built. You measure the spoil. They're digging this thing out, so there's going to be a spoil there, and you can get an estimate of what this shaft may look like. All right. So if we go back to slide 59, if we look at the three center diagrams with the map of Iran in the middle of the three diagrams, and look at the first one look at the map of Iran, and then look to the figure to the left. That's a guess of what the ventilation shafts look like, as depicted by the Pentagon. Now, it was so from the spoil that came out, they guessed that that all three shafts did not go down all the way, and that the middle shaft is the one that goes down all the way. So that's the expectation you have from this diagram. Now, this diagram has the appearance to me. I'll just be has the appearance to me that it's almost invented to be misleading. Let's go to slide 62. 62 is what, if you were sitting in the audience, a member of the press, you might have been misled into thinking what uh, the uh, how the ventilation shaft feeds into the what I call the uranium enrichment ballroom, the where all the dancing occurs, and uh, so you are misled into believing, if you go to slide 63, that when I put those munitions down the center hole, it goes down, the munition enters the chamber, it can sense that it's in an open space, and it detonates. And what the different cartoonish things are showing you is first there's a shock wave. There's a primary, this is really creates a disaster when it occurs. You have a primary shock wave, which I've labeled there. This comes directly from the detonation. And then you get shock waves reflecting off the walls that come back almost unattenuated. And this whole place gets you know it gets mixed up pretty well. There is also, in addition to the shock wave created by the initial rapid expansion of the gases from the exploding material, the gases continue to propagate outward, and they are tremendously hot and filled with toxic materials, and that also fills the cavity, making the cavity even more of an inhospitable place for both centrifuges and certainly for people. So that's what is sort of suggested by this diagram. But let me show you what almost certainly, I mean, if I would say certainly, I don't know the details because I haven't seen the plans, but I can tell you from knowledge of how you deal with blast waves and tunnels. The next slide shows you what the real structure of this ventilation shaft is. Instead of going down directly into the uranium enrichment ballroom, the if we look at the lower left corner, you can see a detail of what the structure looks like. You have first of all, you take a right turn. You don't give them a direct line to anything, and so the only thing that the weapon can do is detonate. Let's go to 60. The next slide is detonate at the bottom of that uh, cavity of the ventilation shaft. Now, um, if you look to the right of the icon of the explosion, you can see all these little baffles I've put in. Those are actually the shapes of baffles that would very efficient set of baffles. If you want, uh, I could send you the technical referee journal articles that where they discuss this kind of baffle. And I'm guessing. I'm not. I haven't designed. So I'm just. What I would do notionally. You'd have a set of baffles. You might have an open cavity after them because you want the gas to expand into the cavity and become lower pressure yet. And then you have a set of other baffles uh, behind it, and then you have a door, a blast door that you can put in place, and you can just hit a switch when this is all pre-designed into the system. Because I'm not a monkey. I'm a real expert designing this system. I'm designing it. I'm putting it underground at great cost and effort because I don't want it destroyed in an attack. So I want to make sure that I know what I'm that I can set it up so that it's a straightforward process for me. So I don't know what's at the bottom of that shaft any more than what the Americans know. But I can tell you it's not what was depicted in the Pentagon briefing. Absolutely not. So, what would you now? This gets to a very interesting um, possibility for members of the Congress because members of the Congress have not so overtly said this, but basically, particularly the Democrats, have been complaining that they're not being kept informed by the administration. And if you're a member of Congress and, for example, you're on the Intelligence Oversight Committee, or if you're on the Armed Services Committee, you're you're supposed to be able to see information that's relevant to the nation's security. You're the Congress. You have the purse strings. You have all kinds of responsibilities of your own. So you have a right to see this information. Now, what the administration appears to be doing is that uh, they appear to be arguing that there's so much classified information that they can't share because it's sensitive intelligence, and and that's nonsense. Let me go to slide 71. All right, this apparently abstract slide. You have now access to unclassified information that would be considered secret, at least by the US government. The graph that you see here is derived from an unclassified briefing that was released during the space based infrared system development. And they were trying to show what the capabilities of the space based infrared system was. And the important uh, thing to keep in mind is this slide was presented uh, without numbers on it or labels. Well, if you are a person who knows the phenomenology of artillery explosions and ballistic missile plume intensities, and um, you can put labels on this, and that's what I did. So this would be a secret or more slide. No reason for it to be secret. It's public. The Congress should have this slide. I'll be sending it to people in the Congress. Now, the important thing about this slide is if you look to the left lower corner of the slide, it shows you the intensity and time profiles, for example, muzzle flashes in what's called the STG mode, which is sea to the ground mode. Satellites we have. Let's go back to slide 69. Just give you a little background. These satellites are in geosynchronous orbit, so they're very high up, 36,000 kilometers from the surface of the Earth. And the satellite looks down. It has a fantastically high technology, what's called infrared focal plane array. For our purposes here, think of it as a television camera. It's not. It's much more sophisticated. It looks in the infrared, looks at all different, well, it looks at several different wavelengths. I could just tell you what the wavelengths are. And when we look at slide 70, you can see a diagram of the satellite itself. Unfortunately, I was intending to put a photograph of the actual um, satellite being worked on. It's a giant satellite. It's really big. It's a heavy satellite. It's very expensive to build. Oh yeah. If I go to slide 73, you can see how big this satellite is. You see the people, the technicians around it. So we have these things in space for the modest cost of $20 billion. I think the original cost of the program was a few $1 billion. So they had fantastic cost overruns over a decade and or more of delays getting this thing into the sky. We finally got something that works. And so now, if we go back to slide 65, what does this tell us? It tells us that when when the GBU 57, this big bomb, detonates at the bottom of this vent, which we know has an elbow in it, and we know has mechanisms to block the shock wave from propagating inward, that the gases that are generated by the explosion are going to have to go somewhere. So they're going to go out the top at the surface. You're going to see a big fireball at the surface. And in their attempt to embellish their claims that they did so much damage to the Fordo facility, they describe what a pilot reported who was involved in the raid. And this pilot said, "Oh, I saw this fantastic fireball lit up the whole sky. I've never seen anything like it before." Well, what this pilot was seeing was the venting of the gases from an explosion of a deep penetrating GBU 57 that did not, almost certainly did not do significant damage to the centrifuge ballroom, because the gases were deflected back out from where the you know out of the tube from where the explosion occurred. That's what they were seeing. So, if you're a member of Congress and you want to know something, you won't know everything, obviously, but you want to know something about uh, what we know now, this minute, about how successful the raid was, you should say, "Can you show me the space based infrared system data on how much we saw in the way of bright flashes of and clouds, how long? And by the way, you know how to model. I mean, modeling of explosives is a big industry for obvious reasons, for safety. So you must have models that will estimate what the cloud should look like, how bright it should be, how long it should take to expand outward. All of that is easily measured from this space monitoring system we, the Congress, paid you $20 billion to build when you said it was only going to cost two or three. So we want that data. You have it now. You almost certainly have the analytical models run to to interpret the data. Give it to us. There's nothing here that should be classified. Nothing. There's no risk to American intelligence operation procedures. Any knowledgeable person who knows something technically can tell you the generalities of what you're going to see here. So there's no sources or methods to be compromised, and and the capabilities are already out in the open. So tell us. We're the Congress. We pay the bills, and we work on the arm. We're members of the Armed Services Committee, Intelligence Committee. And by the way, why didn't we hear about this earlier? So that's what I would suggest the members of Congress do, is ask for it. And incidentally, if they don't ask for it, I'm sorry to say this. I am really angry with the entire political establishment of my country, of the United States. And I include members of the Senate and the House, as well as members of the executive branch. And you are not doing your fiduciary, you're not meeting your fiduciary responsibilities if you don't get this data. And so, as far as I'm concerned, any member of Congress who doesn't do their due doesn't execute their due diligence obligations to get this data is not doing their job. That's my position on this. It's not polite. They don't invite me to ask them, talk to them anyway. They don't ask my advice. The only person who ever asked for my input on intelligence was Tulsi Gabbard, and I gave it to her. And I think the information I gave her has proven to be correct. And incidentally, she knows it's correct. And I hope she's been asking how was the incorrect information circulated and who was involved in doing that, because she knew at the time, this was years ago, that I could show her that the information she was being given was wrong and false and misleading. So anyway, so I think the situation with regard to this attack is, I'd summarize as follows. We don't really know how much damage was done to the Cascade ballrooms underneath the Fordo Mountain, um, but it's entirely possible that they were only uh, not damaged at all or lightly damaged. There is information circulating around that uh, the centrifuges would have been damaged if they lost power during the attack. Uh, that's basically correct because the centrifuges have uranium hexafluoride gas in them, and if the centrifuges stop spinning and they get cool, the gas will condense into a solid on the walls and in the capillary tubes and things in the centrifuge. Um, my understanding, and 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 it's an understanding, I do not know this is true, is that the Iranians built independent power supplies inside Fordow in preparation for this kind of possibility, because the facility was built to survive a determined attack. So one presumes it would have had power supplies so that they could run down the centrifuges in a controlled way without having damage. I don't know that, so I can't. But the claim that they were damaged is unsupported unless the people have real knowledge that the power supplies in under Fordow uh, could not uh, execute the operation of emptying keeping the centrifuges going long enough to, keep them from being damaged. I just don't know. But I can tell you one thing: Hegseth and the chair of the Joint Chiefs presented a briefing that was wholly misleading, and so so and it's on them, and it's obvious why. I mean, the president spoke without knowing, made a claim that everything was obliterated. Absolutely, he could not have had knowledge that that was the situation. In fact, nobody could have had knowledge when he made that statement. The Iranians, because they evacuated the facility wisely, and uh, certainly the United States, the Israeli, nobody could have had that knowledge. So the president was just making it up as he went along. And now everybody's trying to make it appear that the president actually knew what he was doing. And of course, what happened is there was a leak of an initial assessment by the Defense Intelligence Agency that said there was little damage done to the centrifuges. Whether it's right or not, I don't know. But my guess is that that uh, classified report was on the desk of the editors at the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, the New York Times, probably about the same time it arrived on the desk of the director of the study. So somebody went out of their way to make sure this got out fast. And it's a big embarrassment to the administration. And it should be, because the president shouldn't have said that. And Hegseth and the chair of the Joint Chiefs shouldn't be lying to the American people, not to mention the rest of the world, to cover up what happened here. And of course, they're also covering up the fact that this attack was executed when an assessment of its possibility of succeeding would have indicated that success as measured by the objective of destroying Iran's ability to build nuclear weapons from the 60% enriched uranium they already have, was essentially a near zero probability of succeeding. You know, you just couldn't. Now, keep in mind that executing this attack has now given a powerful argument to those within the Iranian administration to say to the Ayatollah, look, you wouldn't have been attacked if you had a nuclear weapon. Those Israelis wouldn't have attacked you. And unless they would have attacked you with nuclear weapons, in which case they would have had to decimate all of Iran. They had to use a very large number of nuclear weapons. It would not necessarily have stopped Iran from retaliating with nuclear weapons. And, the world as we know it would be a profoundly different place. So what's another outcome? Another outcome is Iran was mostly complying with the regulations of the International Atomic Energy Agency by allowing the International Atomic Energy Agency to monitor its activities in enrichment. Now, the Iranians say you can't see anything. Why? Why would you do it? Just put yourself in the position of an Iranian leader. I mean, we put at risk our little nest egg, the highly enriched uranium, because you knew where it was. You were telling the Israelis, you were telling the Americans. So we had to move it. As soon as we thought there was an attack underway, we put it in the back of Ted Postol's Prius, and they drove it off. And my Prius is no longer in my garage. I'm looking for it. So, so it's a pretty sad commentary on the kind of what one would call uh, strategic thinking, strategic planning of the American and Israeli as well political decision makers. They're 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 I don't know. I don't know what the theory of victory is, as John Mearsheimer would say. I don't know what their theory of how they could reach their objective is. It looks just as crazy as the European leaders talking about 5% of their gross domestic products going to a military buildup when their gross domestic products when their gross domestic uh, output is either the growth in their gross domestic product is either at zero or slightly negative these days, and their economy is falling apart. They want to add 5%, and it's going to come out of all their social programs. That's going to cause an uprising. I mean, the lack of any kind of strategic vision in at any level of political leadership in the Western world is extraordinary to me. I mean, if I were a historian looking at this now, I'd say, "Boy, am I going to have a party with this?" Writing all this up, and and you don't need to be a historian at this point. You just all you need to do is have open eyes and know what the current situation is. So that's this is my best. I'm sure it's unsatisfying in many aspects for your audience, but it's not totally without information in it. And I think the guesses I'm making here and pointing out, sharing with the audience, are reasonable and technically sound. Although, I can't claim to know the answer. I guess I'd have to be Donald Trump to know the answer. But I'm just an MIT professor emeritus, so I don't know the answer. Anyway,
Yeah, it was so amazing to understand what has happened and your take on that, because before we talk about it, and right now people wanted to know what's your take in the aftermath of those attacks. Thank you
Wh-
so much, Ted. A
well,
lot
if
of
people want my slides, they can send me an email. Now, make sure you put at the top of the slide if you want it. Iran attack. You don't need to put anything else there. Many people are surprised to know I'm severely dyslexic. In fact, I had trouble reading when they thought I was an idiot. Maybe I am an idiot. When I was very young, my mother sat with me for hours. Thank God for her, because I couldn't read, and at that time they didn't even understand the condition of dyslexia. So it's hard for me to scan for these things. So put at the top, as a courtesy to me, Iran attack, and it takes me no time at all to just send a reply and attach the briefing. And you're welcome to it and use it any way you want. I don't, you know, I'm not claiming authorship.
Thank you so much, Ted, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. It's a great pleasure talking with
Hope
you
to
as
see you
well.
soon, Ted.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.